Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on our GIRI webinar. And today we're looking at 1 year on from the start of the Procurement Act, which came into force a year ago. As we've discussed in various publications, the whole procurement process is very important in the avoidance of error. And so this is why we got together with Chris and Fleur to publicise how important the Procurement Act is in the new relationships we're trying to establish and improve the value of the construction industry. I'm just going to give you a fairly short introduction to GIRI so that you all understand where we came from and what we're trying to do. Then I'll be handing over to Chris and Fleur and Jade from Trowers and Hamlins and Paul from Find It In, who's going to talk about how we can spread the word about these sorts of things. So the GIRI, the Get It Right initiative, we started out as a best practice group at the Institution of Civil Engineers back in 2015. There was a feeling that we didn't know how much error and waste was costing us and what were the root causes of those errors. So we did some research, which was funded by industry, and this is what we found. That the direct cost of error, the sort of non-conformance reporting and tablet records that are prevalent on sites, came out at 5%. Indirect costs is these knock-on effects. You know, when there's an error, then you get a knock-on effect on other trades, loss and expense, and all that sort of thing. That's at 7%. Unrecorded process waste at 6% is where errors are made and covered up or repaired or reworked, but there's no records of them. And then there's latent defects, which is when a building or infrastructure or whatever it happens to be is handed over, but then errors are found by the customer, by the client. And that's at 3%. So this total is 21% of our GDP is being wasted on error. And so this is where GIRI felt action was needed. And we also looked in our research at the root causes of error. So it's not necessarily exactly where the error itself occurs, where the cost occurs, but what's the root cause of it. And the top of that was inadequate planning, which comes right through from the design stage through procurement and the construction stage as well. And it's not just that overall project planning, but also the day-to-day task planning had an impact. Design featured in 6 of the top 10 in one form or another. Not necessarily mistakes in design, but just communication and inadequate attention paid to constructability and things of that nature. Obviously, excessive time and commercial pressures are relevant, and inadequate supervisory skills. But looking at that planning question, I just want to draw your attention to the challenges of productivity in the construction industry. And we found that this relates very significantly to the quality or value of your output. Efficiency, we all understand, is output over input. And people talk about, well, I've got a very efficient business. But your business might be efficient, but if it's not producing what's required, then it's not effective and therefore not productive. And GIRI is very much focused on the fact that error can help you to increase your value and therefore increase your effectiveness and productivity. And of course, errors have a human impact as well. You'll be familiar with Grenfell. The picture on the right-hand side there is the Stonehaven rail disaster in Scotland, and then in the middle there is the Oxgang School, where a panel of masonry just fell off in a storm, and fortunately there were no children in the playground below. But this is the potential impact of error if you don't avoid it. And of course, this culture issue is prevalent in safety and came through from the CDM regulations back in '94, and we've now got the new Building Safety Act, which is we believe is going to have a similar impact on the construction industry. So our strategic aim is to improve construction productivity and quality, reduce cost and waste by eliminating error. And how are we going about that? Well, we have our thought leadership through training, framework, systematic addressing error in a systematic way. Then we have our forums and webinars, such as this one, bringing ideas and thoughts to the construction community. Then we have a website which with research. We've got our design management research. We've got our technology research, and all sorts of other research that's relevant to what we're trying to achieve. On the communications front, we're very active in LinkedIn and other social media. And we provide for our members to network 4 times a year at least at the Institution of Civil Engineers. So what are the benefits of the GEARI approach? Well, I've talked about productivity. In terms of safety, we've got 37% of accidents occurring during rework, and that's really important. Sorry about that. 37% of accidents occur during rework, and on the sustainability front, there's no doubt that if you're not wasting materials and putting stuff in the skip, you're always going to get a better carbon footprint. The quality benefits are manifest, I think, if you're getting it right. Predictability comes from being productive and achieving those other benefits, and that gives everybody a better reputation. So that's enough about GEARI for now. I'm now going to hand over to Chris and Fleur, who are going to take us through the benefits of the new Procurement Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff. And just whilst we're getting our presentation slides up here, thank you for the opportunity today to provide a reflective view on the Procurement Act. As hopefully you guys will see on screen now, our reflections in terms of the first 12 months of the Procurement Act itself, which had its first anniversary on the 24th of February this year. Before we go into some introductions, it's probably worth to mention that Fleur and I, outside or in addition to the, shall we call, 9 to 5, if you will, actually host a podcast which traditionally is focused on the Procurement Act itself. We started it several months, didn't we, before the launch of the Procurement Act. We're now almost 50 episodes in. And for those of you on the call today, and great to see so many of you on the call today, there are 2 particular episodes of interest, and I'm sure that I'll share the link links with Susan and she can get them out to you all. Episode 38, we had a look at some views from a legal perspective, the episode itself, entitled Reform to Reality, and that's with one of our speakers today, Jade from Trowers and Hamlins. And the following episode from that 39 was Why Error Reduction Matters from Clifford Smith from Geary, who obviously just kicked off and hosting today's webinar as well. So we'll make sure that those links are sent out to you. Okay, so as for introductions, so I'm Chris Robinson, Operations Director here at Mace Consult. I spent 20 of my 25 years to date from a procurement perspective, career-wise, within the public sector, working for a number of local authorities, housing associations, a university in the form of Warwick University, a government quango, to name just a few of those different types of organisations within the sector itself. Procurement's all I've ever done, and as I say, for 20 of those 25 years, working directly as an employee of public sector organisations, and even still now, working as a consultant and an operations director here in Mace as an advisory firm. We still work with a significant proportion of public sector organisations here in the UK. Over to you, Fleur.
Thanks, Chris. So hi, everyone. I'm Fleur Summers. Great to see you all on the call today. I'm Associate Director in Procurement here at Mace Consult and have a specific sort of focus on regulated procurement. Very similar to Chris, I spent about 16 plus years working directly within local authority public sector organisation, and then continuing similar to Chris in terms of supporting here in terms of consultancy and working with public sector authorities to deliver procurement activities. So yeah, I've got a range of experience across, sourcing and contract management, so the full end-to-end process, and with a very specific focus at the moment in terms of public procurement and Procurement Act.
Excellent, thank you. So what we're going to do in this really short presentation is give you all a little bit of a flavour in terms of where we are currently, and also a little bit of a backstory that led us to the first anniversary of the Procurement Act. Findings to date, which I think also will be a particularly use for most of you, if not all of you, on the webinar today, in terms of what's going on within the public sector, the opportunities, the volumes, and the different themes and approaches that have been undertaken by the public sector. And as the phrase is often used, contracting authorities, those public sector bodies that are putting those opportunities out for tender. And then also a look ahead in terms of what the next few months, 12 months, etc., are going to look for from a procurement perspective. Then we'll hand over to Jade, who will give you a view from a legal point of view as well. So, Fleur, I don't know whether you want to kind of kick off with this one here in terms of where we're at currently.
Yeah, of course. So obviously where we are at the moment, we've just passed the 12 months since the launch of the Procurement Act. So this was seen as one of the biggest changes to public procurement regulations in quite a while. Obviously, given that it's only 12 months since the launch of the Procurement Act, we are still quite in a transition period. There's still a number of framework agreements, dynamic purchasing systems still available to be utilised. There was a significant amount of procurements that were sort of launched just before the start of the Procurement Act. So there's still quite a lot of dual understanding, dual running in terms of the regulations. But obviously anything new that is published all has to be under the Procurement Act. Last year, so we also saw the first consultation that was held around the Procurement Act, covering off a number of different areas that the Cabinet Office wanted to seek feedback and views upon. Obviously, that's all been analysed, responses submitted, and obviously we're waiting for an outcome of it. But I think that's quite clear to see that this is a regulations and act that is going to evolve over time. It's not going to stay as it is, so there may be changes as we move along through it. We've also seen, I think it was the start of this year, the last of the notice requirements published. So we now have the payments compliance notices, all those types of the last few that were remaining now published, and obviously they will become a requirement to start utilising those. This is including also the contract performance notice, which will be used to manage and publish information about performance. under contracts that are being managed under the Procurement Act. I think that number 7 is quite clear to see in terms of an increased level of transparency seen since the launch of the Procurement Act, and we'll get into a bit of terms of the notices and the numbers that have been seen. But I think this was one of the key aims of the Procurement Act, and I think we're definitely starting to see that now in terms of the information that is available and accessible around the procurement processes and opportunities, market engagement activities, those type of things. So we're definitely starting to see that area coming through. We've got the new central digital platform or Find a Tender. So obviously this is all being used to publish opportunities and share information. So that's part of the implementation of the Procurement Act. Number 9, which is around case law. So obviously there isn't a specific case law that's been published or put in place as of yet linked to the Procurement Act specifically. Obviously we do have case law from the old regulations, which can give an example of areas that still need to be considered under the Procurement Act, but nothing linked specifically to Procurement Act procurements. And we're all still, I suppose, getting to grips with new procedures. Like we had the introduction of the competitive flexible procedure under the Procurement Act, and that's obviously still something that is being explored. Determining how they can contracting authorities determining how they can utilise it to get the benefits and opportunities that it can bring. So that I think we will start to see a lot more of those going forwards.
Yeah.
I think it was just worthwhile highlighting on this slide just a reminder in terms of the objectives of the Procurement Act. So the focus of it was around delivering value for money, maximising public benefit, sharing information, acting with integrity, a treatment of suppliers and how that is managed, and also having regard for SMEs. So it's just, I thought it was worth highlighting that that's what the overall objectives of what the Procurement Act was for.
Yeah. Before we move on, Fleur, it's probably worth mentioning here, and conscious of the audience and where the majority of the audience are from today on the webinar, is that I want to say something that's slightly controversial, but that doesn't matter. I'm of the view that the amount of information that has been shared with suppliers, contractors that bid for opportunities in the public sector has been somewhat limited from the Cabinet Office, and I think that this is the case in point today in terms of the number of people that are on this call and the number of Procurement Act 1 year on sessions that have been advertised across LinkedIn, and contract authorities hosting them as well. I think for yourselves on the webinar today, one of the key things to be mindful of is here, as Fleur has just mentioned, this Act is only 12 months into existence. The sector themselves are still finding their way around it, aren't they? Yeah. As you say, in terms of item 10, getting to grips with the new procedures and flexibility. What I would certainly be encouraging those of you on the webinar today to do from a contractor and supplier perspective is work closely with these public sector bodies, because, as I say, they are still very much finding their way, and working with them and building those relationships are going to be essential in giving you that foresight in terms of forthcoming opportunities. And I think, again, thinking about the size of some of these organisations that are on the webinar today, what they need to do in terms of having regard for small, medium enterprises too. So this slide here is, as it suggests on the heading, the reflections of the first year, and actually gives some interesting insight in terms of the types of notices out of the plethora of notices that are available now for contracting authorities disposal to basically walk through the end-to-end procurement exercise itself. Now, what's quite interesting around the introduction of the Procurement Act and the drivers behind it was to simplify approaches. However, what we have seen is an influx in the number of notices that contracting authorities have to publish. And that, again, from a supplier and contractor perspective, is something that you guys need to be mindful of. Fleur touched on it on the previous slide, that I think it's been a little bit of a slow burn for contracting authorities in the public sector in terms of adapting and advertising procurement through the new regulations, because of the fact that, and Fleur will keep me honest on this, in the days leading up to implementation of the Procurement Act, record numbers of contract notices were published under the previous regulations, 1,000 plus, I think, if I remember rightly. And I think that ultimately was due to the sector utilising previous regulations, which were like a comfy pair of slippers for them, and I think they were a little bit risk averse by nature, of course, and wanted to get as many opportunities published through the previous regulations before having to tackle the new ones. Fleur, any particular insights in terms of those numbers there and the different notices as to what's been published to date?
I think some of them it's just worth highlighting around specifically, you've got the pipeline notices. So far we've seen, I think, just over 5,000 pipeline notices being published. Obviously, we're coming up for the second round of pipeline notices that have to be published by the end of May. So we'll start to see that increasing significantly. But obviously, these are a great opportunity to start seeing, from a supply perspective, where there could be procurement opportunities for being involved in procurement processes and what authorities might be looking to procure in the next 18 months. So I think that's quite a key one to be looking at. Also, the number of preliminary market engagement notices. So to have over 7,000 different notices around preliminary market engagement opportunities, activities, it could be like sessions, surveys, questionnaires. But again, that just shows how much that's being embraced. And I think that's a great opportunity again for suppliers or contractors to really start being involved or having those early conversations and understanding what authorities are looking to do. And obviously we've got a large number of contract details notices. We're 12 months in now, I suppose, so procurements that started pretty much after the launch of the Procurement Act are now coming to the end of where they're getting awarded, and contract details notices are being published as well as copies of the contract. So that's understandable as to why that's quite high. But yeah, in terms of those, I think it's mainly like the pipeline notice and preliminary market engagement notice was quite interesting.
Definitely. Is it worth a quick note to mention in terms of performance notices, given some of the size of the organisations in representation?
Yeah, I mean, this graph only shows some of the main ones that had the highest number. But yeah, the contract performance notices, obviously that's now they're now launched, and obviously we'll start to see contracting authorities publish contract performance notices in terms of how our contracts are actually performing. So we should start to see over the next 12 months, we'll start to see that the contract performance notice section appearing on here. So that is another one to watch out for.
Yeah. And you can move on to the next slide now, Fleur. But particularly in your space, in the construction and infrastructure space, what's set against those and the parameters are contracts equal to or above £5 million in value, and that's the whole contract value itself, where there needs to be a minimum of 3 key performance indicators reported upon at least once every 12 months. Now, again, construction infrastructure, that 5 million figure is relatively small beer, isn't it, really? So again, we will see more of those and those performance notices being released now. Certainly, we've passed the first 12 months of the Act in existence. So what's next then, Fleur? What we got to look out for from a supplier and contractor perspective?
So I think we just tried to split this out a bit. So for suppliers, it's around, I guess, really understanding those systems that are utilised by contracting authorities that you're interested in working with. So fully understand where they're publishing their procurement activities and make sure you're registered for them. Register on the Find Attend Central Digital Platform. You use CPB codes. If you're a Tier 1 contractor, develop your supply chain network and SMEs. Start having those conversations. As I mentioned, their contracting authorities should include information regarding the systems that they use. But as we've just mentioned, look out for preliminary market engagement notices. It's useful activities to participate early on in the procurement and understand what they're looking for. And also your pipeline notices, that gives you a great opportunity and insight into seeing what procurements are coming, so you can start planning your time and potential interest in which ones you might be wanting to participate in.
Absolutely. And then just to finish off there from a contracting authority perspective, although Fleur's covered off a lot of this on the previous slide, I don't want to steal Jade's sandwiches, so to speak, but I think the inevitable case law will start to come out in terms of instances that relate directly to procurements that have been undertaken under the new regulations themselves, i.e. the Procurement Act, and of course evidence and information around, unfortunately, the first few suppliers and contractors that appear on the department list, and I think, again, the procurement review unit themselves and trying to better understand what their roles and responsibilities are in relation to that. Just two more before we move on and hand over to Jade, I believe then. So the competitive flexible procedure is obviously one of the approaches under the Procurement Act itself. The reality is mine and Fleur's findings in terms of what's been happening and advertised through the new regulations is that that approach has been very few and far between. But again, during the next 12 months, the likelihood is that certainly some of the larger public sector contracting authorities will start to approach and undertake procurements through this new competitive flexible procedure, which I think, if we're going to simplify that, Fleur, is a design your own approach, essentially, isn't it? That'll be done by contracting authorities. And then finally there, the outcome of the first consultation exercise, which was concluded back in September of last year. The Cabinet Office did say that it was imminent, but I think it's a case of how long is a piece of string. It will be coming in terms of that and what the impacts will be following the outcome of that consultation exercise. And I think we can hand over to Jade now, can't we?
I think so, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris and Fleur. I'm just going to share my slides, so please do bear with me. I'm slowly getting better at doing this. There we go. Great, can everyone see that? Perfect, thanks. So, hi everyone. For those of you that haven't come across me before, my name is Jade. I'm an associate specialising in public procurement at Trowers and Hamlins. I have got previous experience working in-house, advising on commercial and public procurement matters. So hopefully what I say will be kind of something that rings with everyone on the call. So just in terms of reflections, I've picked out a few areas that I think, kind of having advised clients both on kind of the supplier side and on the contracting authority side, have really stood out over the last last year of the Act. The first one that I wanted to pick up on is the use of the procedures under the Act. So as Chris and Fleur has kind of already commented on, we are under a new regime. The intention was to kind of domesticise public procurement. The old regime was from EU law, and there was very much a focus on kind of removing red tape and bureaucracy in the process, giving more flexibility for contracting authorities on how they run their procedures. In terms of what the Act has delivered, as Chris and Fleur mentioned, we've got the open procedure and the competitive flexible procedure for any process that is regulated and needs a competitive process. Open, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, is essentially contracting authority puts out a notice and asks for tenders, and people provide their tenders by the deadline, and then everyone's evaluated. Little bit more complicated than that, but that's it at its kind of simplest. Competitive flexible procedure, as Chris and Fleur have mentioned, is intended to be more flexible, allows the contracting authority to kind of develop a process that is most suitable for what they're procuring. So kind of going to what Cliff was mentioning and focusing on kind of doing kind of what is needed to kind of reduce errors, deliver the right outputs. Competitive flexible procedure potentially allows you to have that flexibility by building in things like negotiation, dialogue. There's an ability to shortlist, so actually it can be a resource management tool as well for contracting authorities. So there is definitely flexibility brought in by the competitive flexible procedure. Arguably, a lot of that flexibility was in the old regime as well. We had more rigid processes. In many ways, they had to meet certain requirements in the regulations. But essentially, you had to fit within the different procedures that are there, whereas competitive flexible procedure gives you a little bit more scope. What we have noticed is that there has perhaps been some hesitancy to go too wild with the competitive flexible procedure in the first year. We've probably seen more processes being run akin to the traditional approaches we saw under the public contracts regulations. That's not to say we haven't seen innovation in the approaches being taken by contracting authorities. We have seen kind of a real kind of interest in other alternatives. Colleagues of mine have seen suggestions of video submissions to be evaluated. If you look at the guidance on competitive tendering procedures that was published alongside the Act, there is also references to kind of taking a more kind of innovation partnership style approach, allowing for prototypes to be developed during the competitive flexible procedure. So there is scope, but at the moment there certainly hasn't been quite as much uptake on that side, and we've seen kind of more kind of restricted procedure styles. So for those that weren't familiar with that term in the old regime, that's where you essentially have a selection stage with some questions around legal, financial and technical capacity, and that you can bring in from in a kind of a construction context. You can bring in considerations around building safety, for instance, in that kind of technical capacity sense. And then you shortlist based on who passes those, or you might have kind of a maximum number that you're going to take through. So you'll have a scoring process, and then you will invite for tender. But there's, as I said, there's certainly scope for more, and hopefully now that we're a year in, people will start to feel a bit more comfortable with the new regime, and be looking to push the boundaries of the competitive flexible procedure a little bit more. But kind of going back to something that Fleur mentioned, we do have procurement objectives in the Act as well. So kind of whatever process that it's undertaken, contracting authorities need to be having regard to what those objectives are, which are delivering for value for money, maximising public benefit, acting with integrity. And I'm sure those points kind of all ring true with you in terms of wanting to achieve the right outcomes, deliver the right kind of, if you're a supplier, delivering the right outcome for your contracting authority. If you're a contracting authority, showing that what you're actually procuring is worthwhile, and kind of showing where that value is coming from. The other thing to kind of reflect on a little bit is award criteria. The reason that I've chosen to focus on this a little is not necessarily because there is a wholesale change from the old regime, but more kind of going to kind of the audience for this session, going to what Cliff was mentioning earlier around kind of reducing error. Obviously, award criteria is really important because this is essentially where you're testing who is going to be your most advantageous tender. And for those, again, not too familiar with the Act, under Section 19, the winner of a competitive tendering procedure will be the most advantageous tender. And that is the tenderer who isn't disregarded for any kind of procedural reasons, like you submitted your kind of bid late. And they also are the ones that kind of achieve the best score, really. It's probably the easiest way to put it, against the questions that are set and are responded to. So when you're looking at award criteria, they need to be focused on the subject matter of the contract. So you can't, for instance, have a question that's focused on how you performed the last contract. That's obviously not going to be okay, because that's focusing on a completely different contract. What you're looking at is kind of setting questions to test how they will deliver the forthcoming contract, and that might be around quality, it might be around price, and actually we would say that there is a presumption of cost and quality being tested, and that kind of makes sense when you're talking about delivering value for money in particular. There is potentially scope to say you could fix cost, but obviously I think the reality is that in many procurements you would want to be testing cost. There is also kind of a general presumption nowadays that social value will factor into award criteria in some ways. So it's not a requirement in the Act, but if you look at the National Procurement Policy Statement, which was also published alongside the Act, and actually in Section 13, contracting authorities have a duty to have regards to that statement. The National Procurement Policy Statement does focus on social value aims. There is also, for those of you that are familiar with for procurements from central government, there is PPN 002, which talks about setting social value requirements, and the Local Government Association Policy Statement also refers to kind of social value being tested. So that's something to be mindful of. And obviously, when those kind of social value questions are being set, there is really a need to have a think about what the implications of asking for what you're asking for is. Essentially, there is likely to be a cost to that social value element that you're seeking, but also kind of making sure that how you assess it is clear. The reality is, with all award criteria, you can set something, you can try and link it to your specification as best as possible. But if there's ambiguity in that question, then there is kind of the scope for questions to be asked later on when you're giving feedback of, well, that's not how we understood the question, and that becomes difficult. Also, essentially what you need to remember is responses to your award criteria questions, certainly in the quality sense, those responses will be what you take away as the tender promises that will factor into your contract. So if you want to reduce error in the understanding of your contracts, then you want to be making sure that those award criteria are clear so that the responses you get back are hitting the right points. So very much kind of thinking through when you're setting your procurement process, when you're setting your award criteria, what's the output? How do we make sure that the contract we end up with the winning supplier is clear, can be enforced, can be followed? And if you do that throughout your procurement process, then hopefully it will help you in the contract management stages as well. The other thing to note is to really think carefully about the interplay of the design of your competition and the weighting of your award criteria. So the Act allows you to kind of put weightings on your award criteria. So for instance, you say 80% for quality, 20% for price. A lot of people will say, oh, well, that means that absolutely the kind of quality is going to really be the focus here. But in practice, if you design a competitive flexible procedure, for instance, where you have an initial tender stage, and then you have a final tender stage, and you have dialogue in the middle, if that dialogue is intended to essentially help people improve their bids for final tender, if you've got bidders that were scoring 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, then by the time you get to final tenders, if you've had that dialogue to help them improve their scores, the margin between your bidders on quality reduces. So the impact of that weighting also reduces. So potentially actually pricing can really kind of bump up in terms of, so if you're trying to kind of really focus on quality, just have a think also about how you're actually going about running your procedure to kind of avoid an inadvertent kind of carve out into that quality, if that makes sense. So moving on now to award and feedback, and I have kind of mentioned feedback. Chris and Fleur mentioned we haven't got any case law at the moment under the Act. It is still early, we're a year in. What we would say is that under the old regime, the most contentious point of any procurement was the outcome and the provision of feedback. That is essentially when you are telling a supplier as a contracting authority, this is why you haven't won. And under the old regime and under this regime, actually, you need to provide information about the winning tenderer's bid as well to those unsuccessful suppliers. So understandably, this is where people will say, oh, I don't quite agree with that feedback, or, well, why did they get this and we only got this? That's when it starts to kind of become contentious. And certainly if you are a supplier who's lost out on a contract that you previously had, obviously that's going to be quite upsetting. So it makes sense that we haven't yet really had any case law. What we are seeing, and those of you that follow procurement lawyers and procurement practitioners on LinkedIn will probably see posts occasionally going, oh, this is exciting. I've heard a rumour about a such and such case which looks like it's being brought under the Procurement Act. We're slowly getting information about procedures that are being challenged under the Act, but it is still early days. But that's most likely the reason that we haven't quite got case law at the moment, but it sounds like we will slowly be starting to get something. But what I would say for contracting authorities on this session is just to remember that just because we're under a new regime, it doesn't stop the fact that this is probably the most litigious area of procurement. And therefore, it is worth taking the time to think about your feedback letters. you need to be able to explain to a tenderer why they have got their score with reference to what they put in their tender when you provide your feedback. Your feedback should be focused on the moderated evaluation notes from your evaluators, and it needs to clearly explain the outcome. The other thing to just bear in mind as well is what is a change from the old regime is that automatic suspension, which for those that aren't familiar with that term, is essentially a process by which when you announce the award of the procurement via contract award notice under this regime, you have a standstill period for most processes, not all, but most. And that's 8 working days by which the contracting authority cannot enter into that contract. During that period, if a challenger brings a formal claim under the Act, then they can effectively suspend that contract from being entered into beyond those 8 working days until either a court lifts that automatic suspension or the claim is dropped or it's resolved. So it is quite a powerful tool, but it is only available during the standstill now under the Act. The other thing that I really wanted to kind of focus on a little bit is frameworks. I think frameworks, certainly for the audience on this session, is probably something which comes up quite often, either as a contracting authority or as a supplier, you want to be on those frameworks. The reason I wanted to kind of dwell on frameworks a little bit is because actually what I want to say is not necessarily about the Act. I will go on to cover the Act slightly, but it's actually to kind of pick up a point that Fleur said, which is we still have a transitional regime at the moment. We still have frameworks under the Public Contracts Regulations 2015, and they will remain available until they expire, which means that you can effectively award a contract as a contracting authority under a framework if you are entitled to use that framework. And that contract will remain under the old rules, which also means it remains under the old rules for the purposes of modification as well. It is something which I think at the moment, certainly while contracting authorities are still getting used to the Act, potentially could feel like a comfort blanket. If you can use a framework, you can stay under the old regime that you understand, then why not do that? The one thing I wanted to say is that you do need to kind of just really think about whether it is the right route. Whilst it might feel like a bit of a comfort blanket because you know what you're doing because you've done it before, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right route all the time. There will certainly be cases where it makes perfect sense to do a framework award, a framework call-off award. But you need to do your due diligence and make sure that's right. You need to be checking if that framework actually will deliver the services or the goods or the works that you're after. You need to check as a contracting authority, are you actually entitled to use that framework? If you want to, and I know this sounds very silly, but it is a point to note, if you have a supplier in mind, you cannot award to them if they're not on that framework. So don't reference a framework if they're not on there. You need to be, if you're using a framework, it needs to be a supplier that is on that framework. And under the PCR frameworks, you can't just add a new supplier later on. It doesn't work like that. The other thing to bear in mind is that frameworks will have a value cap. They are public contracts. So they, when they were advertised, had an estimated value. So you do need to be making sure that actually there is value left under there. So there are things to think about when you're awarding a framework. And you just need to bear that in mind. Obviously, also with a framework is the point that if you are running a framework, it will be subject to the terms of that framework. So if the terms of the framework do not allow you to do what you want to do, then you're going to need to have a think about an alternative route. So by all means, if the due diligence says, yeah, it's all fine, grab hold of that comfort blanket if that's what you want to do, but just make sure that it's available. Just on the frameworks under the Act, so we now have what's called closed frameworks and we have open frameworks. Open frameworks are essentially a framework that allows you to then set up other frameworks. So what it means is you set it up, you establish your first framework, at some point during the line, and there are kind of actual periods under the Act where you have to reopen and close, you would close down that framework, you'd open a new one, and that allows you the flexibility to potentially add new suppliers onto that framework. It's a little bit more technical. I haven't got time to go through it in full detail. But the reason I wanted to flag it here is because if you're a contracting authority, just bear in mind that actually the process of opening and closing a framework can be quite complicated. It does require different kind of notices, etc. So it's not as easy as it's perhaps presumed to be. It is a different beast in essence to a closed framework. So just bear that in mind. And then finally, I just wanted to quickly pick up on notices. Chris and Fleur have already shown you some really interesting statistics on notices. But I just wanted to kind of remind people that the purpose of the noticing regime under the Procurement Act is transparency. Transparency is not an objective under the Procurement Act because it's intended to just be a golden thread throughout. That's kind of part of the way that the Act was drafted. And one of the kind of approaches to that was taken was to create essentially a digital life cycle of contracts through notices on the central digital platform. So Chris and Fleur mentioned the pipeline notice and the preliminary market engagement notice. Those are kind of your pre-tender notices. Tender, you've got your tender notice or your transparency notice in a direct award sense. Award, you've got your contract award notice. Contract management, that's when you've got a contract in place, you have your contract details notice. You may have to publish your contract if it's over 5 million. And then you've got your contract performance notice, your payment compliance notice, your significant payment notices. And actually, you also have to publish a contract termination notice when your contract expires or is discharged or terminates for any other reason. So it's creating a full digital life cycle. The intention is to therefore give more visibility to suppliers so they know what's going on with contracts. They can expect to see contracts coming back up for procurement at certain points based on what that central digital platform tells them. So it potentially is going to really kind of balance things out both on the supplier and the contracting authority side. So that's just the final thing I wanted to mention on notices. But yeah, so thank you for having me, and I'll take questions at the end.
Okay, thank you very much.
If you're happy to present, we are going to have time for questions, so we're going to have to move through the next presentation quite quickly, if that's okay.
Okay, just start. So, hi everyone. My name's Paul Long. I'm from a company called Ice Blue, and we run the Find It In network, mainly in the West Midlands area. But obviously, we're big advocates of the Procurement Act in the first place, because what we're about is sort of promoting local opportunities to local businesses and making them as transparent as possible. So, if I just give you just a brief overview of what we're seeing over the last 12 months, particularly. Obviously, Jade mentioned it just about the importance of sort of social value coming into the equation. That's really important to us as a network, if you like, of supporting local businesses and the VCSE sector. Also, something that Jade mentioned earlier is about the transparency of the opportunities. So we really believe that promoting the opportunities, we link directly to the Find a Tender and the central platform, but we also link to other tendering portals to make sure that those opportunities are broadcast in the local areas, so local businesses can see those opportunities even if they're not registered on those platforms directly. We can actually guide them and signpost them to those. But certainly what we're seeing is a lot of early supplier engagement as well. So we do a lot of meet the buyer events so that SMEs can meet buyers directly and talk to them about obviously what they can offer, but also what is required from them. So it's really important that they've got the right accreditations and the right all the right ingredients to be able to supply. So it's really important that that is transparent as well. So obviously SMEs are really struggling. They expected the Procurement Act to transform everything, and they were sort of misguided in a little respect in the fact that the procurement is still procurement, so they've still got to understand that element and the protocols that's needed within that. So we're doing a lot of work educating SMEs to show them how to tender. We do a lot of tendering workshops as well that businesses can come on and understand the tendering process. Even though the Procurement Act has made it a lot easier, it's still an onerous challenge to some businesses that aren't academic or technical in that respect, and vice versa with the buyers. I'm sure people on the call today are having the same sort of issues from the other side of it. So we're working with buyers to obviously try and link that up together and help them engage with local suppliers as well to be able to communicate what they're needing to do. So as Chris and Fleur said earlier, it is evolving, and it's a very different sort of area that we're working in at the moment, but it's certainly very much moving forward, and it's stepping positively forward from our perspective. So on the social value point of view, obviously engaging with the local supply chain is a key thing. The VCSE sector is really, really important. We've got a lot of click businesses and businesses that have got young people and people in that have had challenging backgrounds. So how we can engage with them and support them is really important. So again, this is what we do as part of a platform, is to be able to engage with those businesses and the larger buyers to bring them together, almost like a sort of dating agency, if you like, of bringing these businesses and promoting those businesses to those larger organisations looking to improve or help their social value reporting side. So that's in essence what we do on that. Find It In is as I said, is a platform that we've been running since 2007, and in essence, we were built on promoting local opportunities to local businesses. So the Procurement Act, as it stands now, is very much the ethos of how we've been operating right back from 2007, and the impact locally on how it has on local communities. So we've now got just over 100,000 members across the network, and we promote billions of pounds of opportunities every year. The important thing for us is it's not all about the big opportunities. So we're also in the lower end of the threshold. So those sort of sub £50,000 is really important and really needed by the SMEs who not necessarily can go for the larger opportunities. So it's really important that we promote those smaller opportunities and make it easier for the buyers to promote those opportunities and get good value from what they're looking for. As I said earlier, we do promote early engagement. We also promote strengthening supply chains for buyers. So we organise Meet the Buyer events, and we've run over 450 over the last sort of 19 years, and we get a lot of a lot of quality coming through, because we've now got a database that we can actually target specific sectors for the buyers. So it means that there's some value there, that they're meeting people that they want to meet, rather than a generic sort of a sector of suppliers. And it's really important that, from a regional perspective, that buyers can actually see and meet local suppliers. It's amazing what organisations are on your doorstep that you don't know about, and by us promoting the Meet the Buyer events, or promoting the opportunities, that buyers get the access to that through either those buyers submitting tenders, or obviously coming to the Meet the Buyer event. So pretty much every Meet the Buyer event we run, there's always a diamond in there that of a supplier that a contractor hasn't seen before, that's really good. So so it's really important that we keep that going across the board.
Paul, we're going to have to stop there, because we've only got 5 minutes left, so
okay,
we're just
cool.
going to move on to questions, if that's all right. But we will share links after the event with everybody who's attended.
Cool.
So thank you. So just a couple of questions to pick up on, and then if anyone has a further question, either pop it in the chat or raise your hand. So we've got a question from Joel. I think this is for you, Chris and Fleur, around the notice volumes that you'd shown. So are the notice volumes shown based purely on Procurement Act compliant notices, or do they include legacy notices published during the transition period?
So they are purely notices under the Procurement Act from when it went live on the 24th of February. 2025.
Yeah, there's a nifty little feature that you can do there on the platform where you can actually filter them, can't you?
So you can you can deselect the old ones and just have the Procurement Act ones, and then the dates.
Thank you. And then a question from Alan. What's the view regarding supplier use of the CDP? Is it still embryonic?
I think I'm trying to remember, but there was a newsletter from the Cabinet Office recently around the number of suppliers that had registered on the Central Digital Platform. And I think it was quite a number. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I think it is being utilised quite a bit by suppliers.
There was an initial flurry, wasn't there, at the beginning, I think, and now it's started to level off. But actually, I think that almost goes full circle to the point I made when we were doing our presentation, in that I don't necessarily think the Cabinet Office have done a sterling job when it comes to actually informing suppliers around, the implications of the Act and how they can be best prepared for it.
Thank you. And then a couple of questions from Paul Robinson. Are the playbook principles still being promoted? And how do you manage the influence of AI on the procurement process?
Do you want me to take that one? I mean, big questions with 3 minutes to go, but I'll do my best. So are the playbook principles still being promoted? Absolutely. If you kind of reflect on what the Act is achieving to do, I'd say that the playbook principles are kind of very much embedded in the Act itself. That the Act is effectively trying to push forward those principles that have always kind of been there in the playbooks. And for good reason. You'll actually also see that the consultation, which Chris and Fleur mentioned, arguably is trying to again push some of those principles forward. So the make or buy assessment that is referenced in the playbooks, that was within the consultation that was consulted on back in 2025. So yeah, absolutely, and do be bearing in mind the playbooks, and I'm sure that's what Claire is about to come in and say. But just quickly on the AI point, managing the influence of AI in the procurement process as contracting authority, ask for transparency from suppliers on how they're using AI in your invitation to tender documentation. Think about how you are assessing. Going back to my thing around award criteria, what you put in your question is what you will get out. So think about how you're phrasing that question. There are ways to kind of think about questions and ask questions which AI will not necessarily be able to kind of present in the same way. And if you really want people to be kind of actually providing a clear response that is verifiable in the sense that they can stand behind what they're saying, there is a limit to how far arguably AI can take that. So that there are things you can do. I just, to be honest, it kind of needs a bit more than 3 minutes to advise on. And I'll pass to Cliff.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the AI is concerned, I think we've done quite a lot of research, and we've published information about the use of AI in construction and the things you need to be careful of and the things that where it's useful. But it is still a new beast, and we need to be careful with it. I think that playbook idea has got to be pushed, and is being pushed on all sorts of fronts, as well as the Procurement Act, and we need to keep on pushing with that. And we've got both the public sector and the private sector playbooks now, which are very coincident. So a lot of work still being done on that. One thing from me: what is the Procurement Compliance Service that's come into force? What do they do?
Okay, so hopefully I'll get this right, Jade, but it's a bit of an oversight framework for contracting authorities. So they'll look at procurement activities that are being published, and look into investigate recommendations or those type of things. And I think it's to highlight systemic issues in terms of procurement activities and stuff like that. So it's to try and make sure that things are in line with what is meant to be carried out in the Procurement Act.
Friendly auditors, if there is such a thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, essentially, if you want to bring a procurement claim and before the courts, that's how you get your suspension, automatic suspension. That's how you get your damages, etc. But the procurement, the service is part of the procurement review unit, which sits within Cabinet Office, and they have a kind of a strategic oversight view of the Procurement Act. It's how it's approached, and they can issue kind of public reports on investigations they've done, either on a specific authority or a group of authorities if they see like a systemic issue across.
Thank you. Which brings me to thanking you very much for your contributions today. Sorry we cut you a little bit short, Paul, but if you can give us your slides, we'll make sure that they're published on our website so people will be able to pick up on that alongside this broadcast, which is recorded. So thank you very much, Fleur and Chris and Jade and Paul, and thank you all very much for attending, and hopefully you'll join us at our next webinar in a month's time. Cheers.